Hey everybody, welcome back to the Jubilee, Freedom, and Shalom podcast.
Shalom.
Shalom. We are back. It's been a long time since I've been able to say that, and it feels so good. Yeah, we're back for some more episodes. We are both youth ministers, so we on accident, without telling you, took a break in the summer because life is crazy for us in the summer. And we had lots of trips that were all good. Were they all good for you, Nate?
Yeah, no one died. So.
No one died. No one got sick.
Yeah,
we're good. It was pretty fun to have a fairly normal summer. We're sitting in 2021 with COVID stuff still being around.
Yeah, in Tennessee being a world leader in COVID transmission.
Good for y'all.
Yeah.
Look at you doing it.
I think recently they said that if we were a country, we would be the second.
Uh-oh.
We'd be second on the list of the
just
most
percentage wise.
Yeah, or just the most COVID cases. Yeah.
Yikes. Well,
and Tennessee's not the biggest state, so
no, it's not. It's pretty.
We're doing our very best.
Yeah.
To be friendly and to share everything we have with each other.
I mean, it's a volunteer state,
just
right?
Like the Christian, just like the Christians in Acts 2.
We volunteer to all get COVID at the same time.
Yeah.
Make it. We volunteer.
Yeah, we're.
But yeah, we're back. We're back to record some more episodes, and we have a lot of things that we're excited to talk about. A lot of things that have gotten popular since we stopped recording. Different shows and podcasts and topics and things that we're excited to talk about. There's been a lot of things for us that have changed in the last couple of months since we've stopped recording. Different things that our brains are obsessing over. And so we are kind of jumping into a new season. Call it season 2 if you want to call it season 2. Of some more episodes for discussion and for reflection. And before we did that, we wanted to just say out loud, Nate and I had this conversation the other day, just a reminder of what we're doing here and what we're trying to accomplish. We believe that God's kingdom coming to earth is important. And we believe that we were given a divine role to be rulers and co-creators and cultivators with God, to bring all of the goodness out of creation, all the potential out of creation, to declare Jubilee on things, to set the oppressed free, to take back things that the enemy has stolen from us in creation and relationships and all that we would declare freedom over people, and that ultimately would help usher in this new season. New season sounds not the right word. New era, new era of Shalom.
Yeah.
And towards that end, this podcast, we want to just bring out, reflect on all sorts of things, either things that we see that are corruptions and distortions of things that God desires for us, or to bring out, to shine light on people who may or may not be Jesus followers that are doing things that we believe are moving the right direction. They maybe don't know that that's why they're going that way, but it's because of their God-given creative abilities that they're able to do what they do, and calling that out, and then dreaming about what would it look like for the church to be a part of that. And so we want to just spend a lot of time reflecting on all of that stuff. We don't claim to be the experts necessarily, but we want to ask some good questions that we feel like haven't been asked, and spend some time reflecting. And so a huge part of that is, and we've said this before, but I just want to say it again, it's a lot better when you guys can interact with us, whoever's listening, reaching out to us on our email, jubileefreedomshalom@gmail.com, or if you know that you live in the same city as us, or you have our phone numbers, or you can comment on YouTube, all that kind of stuff, which I guess Facebook hosts podcasts now. So maybe we can get some commenting on Facebook as well.
Yeah, we need to, that's one thing we haven't pulled the trigger on, but we found out about a month ago that that's possible. So yeah, we'd love to, because Facebook really punishes you when you post like a link to something off of Facebook. So that helps us keep it on Facebook, helps us have the ability to do commenting and stuff. So I hope that means it'll lead to some more conversations, more two-way conversations than we've been having with the audience. So I'm really excited about that.
And we'd love for that to be a part of what we do, because that just enriches all of our experiences, and gives us a bigger perspective on what we're doing here and how to go about it. So with all that in mind, Nate, you have had some things going on, one thing in particular with permaculture, but tell us some of what has been influencing you, what you've been paying attention to, watching since we've last recorded.
Yeah, so I'm getting my permaculture design certificate right now, which is being taught by kind of world leader in that department. Permaculture meaning permanent agriculture, where you can set up systems that make fruit and edible things and medicinal things, and all kinds of things that are useful to humans, whether it be firewood, keep warm in the winter, whatever it is, but where you could walk away for 100 years and come back and it's still pumping out good stuff that would support human life and flourishing. So getting my certificate from a guy named Jeff Lawton, who runs the Permaculture Institute in Australia, and he's been responsible for designing properties, like from governments being like, hey, can you design this for us, down to people's backyards. So he's doing a lot more on the bigger project front now, and he's like, hey, I need to train up a generation behind me that can take over the 1 acre backyard stuff, because I have to go to Yemen tomorrow and design,
turn a desert into a oasis.
And he does that. So he's got a video called Greening the Desert. I think there's 2 of them, where he goes to some really gnarly desert places and starts bringing it back to life. It's super cool, and it actually changes like the weather patterns and stuff in the area where it rains more often, and it's just really cool. There's one where he's down by the Dead Sea, which is not only like the lowest place on earth, but super high salt content in the soil. And if you've ever heard of how the Romans destroyed Carthage, they poured salt all over the soil, and that's what demolished that city back in the day. So salt's not great, but even still, they're doing some cool stuff to make that inert and still be able to grow food for people. And I think that's the coolest thing. If you can take your ideas to the worst scenario on planet Earth and they still flourish, that's an idea I am excited about sharing with other people. So I'm going to get my certificate in that so I can be a designer, kind of like an architect, if you will, for permaculture and permaculture designed things, which you can actually permaculture design like your business. It's kind of a way of thinking and a set of questions you ask, and kind of designing based off of those things. So it's kind of an architect, but not just dealing with physics of whether this building will fall down, but kind of thinking about how do humans work and designing around that, so that when we get inside that building or inside that system or inside that business, we're not frustrated all the time, which happens a lot.
Some chemistry.
So that's one thing I'm up to right now. Really excited about getting that certificate. Jeff Lawton's an amazing teacher, and he's been doing it for a long time. So I know if you're a permaculture person, you're like, Jeff Lawton. But if you don't know about any of that, you're like, I don't care who that is. But
that's crazy Australians.
Yeah. So other than that, I've been recording some music recently. Me and Daniel both have been working on music. Daniel just released 2 songs. I don't know if you want to talk about that a little bit.
So my cousin Davis and I, we both have wanted to record some music for a long time, and he lives in Colorado and found some cheap flights out here, and we went up to a cabin because both of us are distracted by everything else in life that we don't actually sit down and finish a song or something. So went up to a cabin, recorded some songs. We're really proud of them. You can find them under Daniel Reed. They're called, it's like a 2-song EP called Just Kids and Glimpses. If you want to listen to those. But anyway, yeah, that's been something that has been interesting because I've had to kind of teach myself some things about music production and some different stuff like that as I've been working on that. So that's been something that I've been thinking about a lot over the past couple months. And the main thing that's really been on my mind is we kind of, Emily and I kind of did not an assessment, but just we're praying and thinking about what we should be talking about with our students on Wednesday nights. So our Sunday mornings are pretty set as far as what we're talking about. Just working through the books of the Bible, but Wednesday nights with the youth group is kind of our time to sit around as a family in our family room at our house and talk about some things together. And so the thing that kept coming up was the conversation around identity, and that has been really good, and really well received by the students, and has turned out to be really important to them and really impactful. So I've been kind of obsessing over the ins and outs of that conversation, talking about, who you are, conversations we've had before on this podcast a few times, but things about, you can say that you're tall, but the minute that you get in a car accident and can't use your legs anymore, like that isn't who you are anymore. So those things that can go away, those aren't the things that are true about who you are. The things that are true about who you are the things that God says about you, and then everything else is something that you have, and that the way that God has uniquely formed you is the way that he wants to uniquely transform you. He doesn't want a bunch of clones who all do the same thing and look the same way and act the same way and talk the same way, but he wants a Nate Hale version of Jesus and a Daniel Reed version of Jesus in the world, with your tendencies and your interests and your hobbies and your all of that, your skills. So we've been
applied to the most healthy thing.
Yes.
Instead of kind of like the Enneagram, where it's like, I'm a 9 and there's healthy 9s and there's,
right,
when 9s go unhealthy, it goes this way.
Yeah.
But to take all those qualities and personality traits and have them settled in the most healthiest.
Right. And a lot of those conversations, at least that I was a part of in church, if it ever got brought up, was more in the realm of like relationships and like how you treat people and just like being a good person, which is great. Like I think that's important, but where we're trying to go with the students, and we're kind of logically walking this direction, is to talk about, I think that, like we've talked about on this podcast, I think that the job that we have, or the degree that we chase, like that we want to get, or all of that plays into, those are things that God can use for the kingdom. And it's not like, well, I go to work over here and then I come home and then I can do like some of the sacred stuff, but that God wants to transform all of it, and wants you to be a part, like your entire life, to be ruling and reigning.
So we just finished reading a book by David Kinnaman and Mark Matlock, called Faith for Exiles, written by the Barna Group, Barna. And I thought it was a great book. They've had 4 books in a series about, so the Barna Group does a lot of statistical work. They do a lot of interviews and what's the word?
Research.
Where you fill out the
polls
and all that kind of stuff. So they have kind of seen 4 groups of people emerge, of like, let's say 20 to 30-year-olds. There's people that grew up in church and have completely left, don't believe in a God. There's people that still believe but don't go to church, or they call them nomads. You have your habitual churchgoers that go to church every week but aren't really involved, like they do it just because out of habit,
some obligation.
Yeah, maybe grandma would get mad and it would cause a rift in the family or whatever. They're just not they're there for Sunday mornings, but they're not there for,
or they go and they have some feeling deep down that like, this is probably good for me. I don't really know why, but
they're not really engaged though. Like,
no,
they're not really resilient. And maybe it would be the people that if something went wrong in life, they'd be like, what the heck? I go to church on Sunday mornings. How could God let this happen to me? Number 4 would be resilient disciples, people that are very just like, I don't care if the preacher falls from grace. I don't care if life goes bad or my church falls apart. Like, I'm still here and I'm still a part of the mission of the kingdom, and very resilient, can take a lick and still keep going. And they're the people that are going to be doing that extra stuff, the Bible studies, the service projects, just helping with the homeless ministry, whatever those things are. They're going to be the people that are instigating more and more ministry happening around your church, even though they don't get paid, even though that's not their job, quote unquote.
Right.
And so the first book they wrote about people who have left the church and are just completely out on God. It was called You Lost Me. And then, they wrote books about all 4 categories. But this one, Faith for Exiles, is about the people who stayed, and kind of being like, okay, why did they stay? What was their experience? Is there any common experience? And to get back around to what Daniel was saying, one of the huge 5 takeaways from the book is people that are resilient in their faith and love Jesus, and even through a bunch of crappy stuff, like they're still all in. Those have been people that have been able to look at their careers, their vocations, how they make money, how they, make a living, and see how that connects to what God's doing on planet Earth. And so that's a really big deal, and being able to discern that from a young age, the church being a part of you, seeing the connection there. Like, I 100% did not make the connection until I was 21 or 22 about how gardening had anything to do with the church or anything to do with God, which now is just like the most obvious thing. That's like the craziest thought to me that but I distinctly remember praying a prayer of like, I'm so sorry, God, that I've been reading about how things grow and how the world works and all this. I'm getting really obsessed about all of that. And I think I've made it into an idol. And I just want to give that back to you and let you take that away. Because if you don't want me to be thinking about that stuff, and I'm spending way too much time on that instead of reading, the Bible or praying or whatever we define like healthy spiritual location by, but you can have it. Because I think I'm going off the deep end with being obsessed about this topic. And then I don't know, I through a conversation or two or something, you're like, why would it be either or? Like, why would it be pick God or pick gardening? Like, that's not even a fair dichotomy at all.
Right.
You're pitting 2 things against each other that are 100% for each other. So I was like, oh, that's true. I didn't think about that. And so people that are able to see that connection and see, this is what I'm doing in my income, part of my life, where I'm supporting myself and my family.
Yeah.
And connecting that with God's mission on earth is super important for our spiritual health. And so I think it's really good for us to be talking to our students and making that connection way before they even start really fully supporting themselves.
Yeah, well, because for me, it's like, the whole rule with investing, like time is on your side. As far as the sooner that you can start, you can open a Roth IRA. And even if you're putting, $1 a day into it, if you start doing that when you're 18, like, you're literally going to crush everyone. Like, I don't know off the top of my head, they used to give us all the numbers and it was hard to calculate, to wrap your mind around how much money it was at 65 or whatever. But same idea in this conversation of identity for us is like, I actually don't want our students to get to college and be trying to figure out, here's what I'm going to do in the future, and then be full of like guilt or shame or just apathy towards how all that connects, if that makes sense. I don't want them to be in school for 12 years to be a doctor after, like, once they get to college, and then feel guilty that they like wasted 12 years of their life to do this thing. I want them to think like, has God gifted you with what it takes to heal people? Because healing people is very, very much a part of the kingdom.
Yeah.
Like, very much being a doctor falls in line with things that God wants for you. But I don't want you to do it because eventually one day you're going to make a ton of money to get the car, to get the house, to get the things, to have the status, whatever. If it is in your heart to heal people, then like, I want you to go for it. And then, in my opinion, then the whole pursuit of being a doctor becomes very spiritual. If you can train people to approach life that way, then they're not, the moments where it gets really hard, where they wish they weren't still in school, where they wish they could just be a doctor already, they can reflect and say, actually, if I think back to the reason that I'm even here to do this, like, I can carry on because I know that God has like set this for me, and that I'm going to do this, and I'm going to be a part of declaring Jubilee, freedom, and shalom. I'm going to be a part of the Isaiah 61 mission that Jesus, talks about, all that kind of stuff. And because if you wait till people are adults to have that conversation, they've already probably slogged through, a couple of years of their selling insurance, or, whatever their profession is, to where they hate it already. And so our hope is to hit that early on, because I also think the church hasn't done a very good job, from my experience, of celebrating, or celebrating and supporting students when they graduate, or just people in general, in their like hobbies and interests and the jobs they want to have. It's kind of like, we're all going to go out and get jobs just because we have to, but you probably work too much and you should be more focused on God, or whatever, is like always the unhealthy conversation. Yeah. There isn't a whole lot of like, I see in you this skill, and I think that you could use that to be, a financial advisor. I think that you could do that for people. And I think you could do it even to throw out, like, have you ever heard of Thrivent? Have you ever heard of, what's the other one that we talked? Everence. Have you heard of these places that can, Envoy is another one. Like, have you heard of them? You can work for them, and you can be helping ministers and also just people who are trying to do good things with their money, and not just store up in bigger barns. They're trying to do, like, be responsible, that kind of thing, to like call it out and say, like, you should chase after that. Or, you always have some students that are like, I want to be a vet. And you're like, right on, man, that's awesome. Like, why do you want to do that? And how are you going to get there? Like, we need to be a part of that conversation.
Yeah.
Because where else will we want them to turn to figure out why they want to do it, and where they're going, and how they're going to get there?
So one thing that I think a lot of us don't really think about, and we do it with our like marriages and relationships, and we also do it with, money and our income, our livelihood, and that's, we don't really know where we're trying to get to.
Right.
I wish I would have saved it, but there's a really cool cartoon that I saw come through Facebook that kind of wrapped this up, where there's like a guy and he grows up on a farm and he loves playing in the woods, and it's just a beautiful place. And then he goes off the farm and spends years on an education, and then gets a career, and then he finally he makes enough money to retire, and all he wants to do is retire somewhere where there's the woods and all the things he left in his childhood behind. And he comes back and all the trees are gone because he spent his entire career working for like a logging company.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just like kind of, you're already there. It's like what I imagine a racehorse, like the gun goes off and you run so fast and you're about to die, and you get back and you're like, we were just here. I could have stood still and I was already here.
Yeah.
Why did what was all that about? I got whipped and there's a gun. It's like, what was all that about? There's this big frenzy about life where it's like, go, 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 go. It's like, but I think what I already had was good. And I know that's really simplistic. But what I mean to say is a lot of us don't think about where we're going. So we just do the next thing, and we do the next thing, and we do the next thing. So it's like, well, this feels a little empty, so let's get married. And okay, and this feels a little empty, so let's have kids. And this feels a little empty, so let's go on cruises. I don't know what the next thing is, but there's always this next thing, and you're like, well, maybe I'll find the answer there. And so you just jump into that.
Right.
And when it comes to money, I think a lot of us are just doing the next thing. It's like, well, get a little job, and then you buy some stuff that you reward yourself. Buy the video game, do whatever you want to do, buy some snacks, whatever. And that's what one of my students just told me the other day. So what do you do? You got a job? Cool. What are you doing with some of that? You putting 15% aside to some savings? Like, I just buying a bunch of snacks. And I was like, okay, cool. It was so funny. I was like, well, maybe you should decrease your snack budget by 15% and put that in a Roth IRA. But
it sounds crazy,
but the point is this: if you keep asking why, I think you eventually run out of good answers, where it's like, why do you have this job? Because you got to have a job. It's like, okay, why do you got to have a job? Well, because people have bills, and you gotta have money for stuff. And you're like, okay, and why do you need to pay? Like, do you just pay those bills forever, or like, no, like you'll retire one day, I guess, or it'll just work forever. And you're like, oh, is that what you want to do? You want to do that job until you're like 9 years old and on a walker? And they're like, oh, well, yeah, I guess I would retire. And you're like, okay, so you're actually working to retire. That's okay. Well, then when do you retire? And they're like, well, at 65, of course. And you're like, why not retire? If you're working to retire, then why not retire at 30?
Yeah.
Like, why? There are some people that want to do their job until they want to die on the job, and that's cool. And if that's what you want to do, then do it. But if you are working to retire and then you just assume that's 65, why?
Yeah,
why are you going to do that?
Yeah.
And if you're going to work to retire, then realize that right now as an 18-year-old and retire when you're 30.
Right.
Because you could
make decisions that go that direction.
Right. And
to retire as early as you can.
But people are just like, you're supposed to put like 40, 50 years in the career, right? And you're like, why?
Yeah, who
says? It's like, I know that a lot of the retirement stuff with Social Security starts at 65, and that's when you're a senior citizen, quote unquote. Well, but why retire then? Why wait that long? Why be so unfocused and then show up at that finish line kind of like, I guess I'm done now?
Yeah.
No, be more on point about that. And if your real answer to all the why questions is, I guess, to retire one day, it's like, okay, and then what do you want to do? It's like, I guess I'll just die. Sit around and die. And you're like, okay, so your goal in life is to work so you can sit around and die.
Work a job you don't want to work.
I'm going to go ahead and call your crap on that. And you need to figure out why you're on this planet, because you're going to work, you're going to get married, you're going to have kids, you're going to like retirement age and all, and you're going to get to the end of it all. and you're going to sit there on your front porch, retired, quote unquote, and you're just going to be like, what was that all about? And you're going to have to come right back around to the question that you should have answered when you're 18 years old, which is why I'm on this stupid planet.
Yeah.
And is it stupid at all? Maybe it's incredible. And I just think it's stupid and toiling and hard and tedious. Yeah. Maybe it's not any of that stuff. Maybe you just got lulled into some other person's game. Yeah. And I want to wake people up, man. Like me and Rachel finally, paid her house off. I don't know if I said that on the podcast or not, but we paid her podcast, or sorry, I paid her podcast off. I paid her house off. I paid, all of her debts off, not me and Rachel both. And so now, we know, unless we do have kids, which that will be a miracle if that happens, but I'm not saying it can't. But right now with the two of us, we know we need X amount of dollars in savings, and then we're technically done. Yeah. And we're over halfway there. And that's a really cool thought. But I was seeing something the other day where, someone had retired to Panama or somewhere in Central America, and they were living on like $1,200 a month. And I just had the realization, I was like, oh, like my investments right now are bringing in, like we're renting our house in Antioch for $1,200 a month. Yeah. I was like, oh, so technically
paid off house for $1,200.
Paid off house. So it's just every rent check that comes in is just, we get to decide where it goes. It's not already claimed. Right. And I'm like, well, that right there, even if we had no savings, that's bringing $1,200 a month. And it made me realize, like, I don't want to leave Nashville. I don't want to dip out and just be like, see you suckers later. But it just made me realize, like, oh,
you're closer to that than you thought.
That's like a right now thing. And if I wanted to just dip out and live in Panama and eat some tacos for the rest of my life, like that's what I could do. Now, that's not what I want to exist for. I love tacos, don't get me wrong. I love them a lot, but there's some other things I want to get done. And I feel like we're getting close to being able to take us out of the equation, our worries, our needs, our food, all that stuff. And a lot of you may be thinking to yourself, well, Jesus didn't have a Roth IRA, he didn't have a retirement account. It's like, that's true. And I struggle with that sometimes. The way that my thought process right now is thinking about it is, let's get us covered. So literally every waking moment of our lives, we can just be thinking about other people, and we can think about what their needs are and how we can serve them. Because there's a lot of people in the world that can't. I mean, I lived around and worked with people in Honduras that they had to get up every morning and take 5-gallon buckets, down to the river to get water to drink for the next 2 days. And,
right.
They're having to spend all this time to do stuff that we just turn a switch, a faucet, and it's there.
Well, and it's like the whole Galatians 5 thing of like, how are you going to use your freedom?
Yeah, if you use your freedom for yourself, you're to destroy yourself.
Yeah,
but
and probably other people.
Yeah, absolutely. So I get the critique. I do, of like, Jesus didn't have a retirement account, and he wanted us to release that money, out into the world. It's like I understand that. I also would say that Jesus only lived at 33 years old, and no one had to take care of him or, right, in his old age. And, the point is, I don't want to be a burden for anyone else. I want to put my stuff aside. That's taken care of. We're good. Now I'm thinking every day for other people.
Right.
I'm at peace with that right now. I may not be at peace about it 5 years from now. Maybe it's like, hey, I need to let all this money go to kingdom stuff and just trust that God's going to take care of me every year, instead of trusting the bank account to take care of me every year.
Right.
So that's fair, but that's something that we've been thinking about a lot recently.
Yeah.
I don't know if you want to talk about some of the documentaries and podcasts you've been listening to recently.
So generally, things that we're going to be talking about this season, there's a lot of stuff, and you heard it in some of what we just said, but there's some of the permaculture stuff that we want to reflect on. Nate will have some stuff, especially once he has his certificate. But even before that are just some things that are relevant. Like he said, permaculture is not just it's permanent agriculture, but it doesn't have to be just agriculture. It's more of a way of looking at systems, and how you approach that and the questions you ask. So there's some things on that we want to reflect on. There's some, Bible Project is always stirring up thoughts for us. Some things we'll reflect on. We mentioned towards the end of last season about the Bema Project, or I always call it Bema Project. It's just the Bema podcast. But it's a guy that basically he walks through similar things as the Bible Project.
His name's Marty Solomon.
Marty Solomon. He's actually also in the Pacific Northwest, which is kind of funny. But he walks through some of the same ideas with some different language and some different thoughts, and he does it in order. So if you want to go listen to his podcast, Bible Project is kind of like, topic here, topic there, book here, book there. But Bema's like, let's start at square one and work our way forward.
When he says square one, what he means is start with Genesis 1.
Genesis 1. And work all the way through the Bible. And I think they're still going. I don't know. Have they finished all their episodes?
No, they're still putting out new podcasts. I was surprised. I at first thought it was a 3-year program for like a discipleship program, basically, because he works on a college campus and college ministry. So I thought he had done like 3 or 4 years of, we're going to listen to one of these every week first semester and have discussion groups. But I think they're still putting new stuff out and reflecting on some things that they did in the early days. Cool.
So that brings up some things. Just he has some different ways of talking about things. For example, one thing that I've thought about a lot recently, I'm in some discipleship groups, so we're going through the Sermon on the Mount. But one thing that Marty Solomon brought up, was the idea that you could boil the whole story of the Bible down to, for human beings, looking at a story and saying, is this human going to be able to control their desires and focus on what God desires for them? It's kind of like something he brings up a lot.
And it's,
which is
for
really
me, what I've been saying to my students is like, read the entire Bible with this question. What do people do when they get power, and what do they do when they have abundance?
Right.
And it's usually weaponize it.
Right. Yeah, and then the flip side of that question is, what would God have you do with that? Right. So there's a lot there that we're going to reflect on. Nate mentioned the Faith for Exiles book. I need to skim through it again. I read it when it first came out, like 2 years ago, a year ago.
I've been doing a ton of highlighting, so I'm ready for that conversation.
Just highlighted the whole thing.
It's pretty intense. I'm a numbers person because I've had people in the past that have taken my stories or taken what I'm saying. Like, a lot of people are dealing with this. A lot of young generation is going through this thought process, and they're like, a lot and many are not numbers, and they're not statistics. And so for me, I'm like, yeah, that's fair. You could say a lot of people don't like your preaching. And you're like,
who's a lot?
And how many?
Is it just loud, 3 loud people, or
3 loud people?
100 people?
So that's fair. And so that's why the Barna group has been a really cool resource for me. And there are a lot of statistics in the book, and I really appreciate that. But what's funny is I taught You Lost Me back in the day at the church I grew up at.
Right.
And it was a spread. We had 18 to 80-year-olds in there, and we had a really good conversation. But I would have people that would come up to me afterwards, because once you're confronted with numbers, it's kind of like, oh, if that's true, that's not good.
Yeah,
it's really hard to argue with, And but I still had people come up afterwards and be like, that was a wild statistic, And I was like, yeah, it's just really like, oof, we should wake up and think, what do we need to do in light of that information? But they would be like, I just have a hard time believing that that's true. And you're like, what? Like, so you're just going to deny
it's a number,
or to believe that Barna makes up and numbers and lies about them. Like, that's just hard.
That is getting ridiculous. Yeah, we want to reflect on some of that. There's some good findings in there, and it is a certain age group they were looking at, but there are larger truths to be gleaned from what they talk about in that book, and just some things to theorize about and kind of reflect on as we try to do this thing. And then the other thing that one thing that I've been listening to a lot and just thinking about a lot recently is The Rise and Fall of Mars Hill. It's a podcast by Christianity Today that has come out. It's been out for a while, actually. It's just gotten more popular recently, I think. But basically the story of a mega church preacher named Mark Driscoll. If you're listening to us, you may have listened to it at some point. But that podcast, they've done a great job with it, just kind of telling the story of what happened at Mars Hill. And it was
basically the setup for that is like there were 15,000 members, and within a year they completely disappeared. And it tells a story of,
and now the church doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah. So how did 15,000 person strong church disappear in a year?
And pretty clear. I mean, there are a lot of things to blame in the process, but a lot of what they focus on is the preacher Mark Driscoll and how he handled. I mean, again, it's to the Behemoth thing. How did he handled power and abundance, and how that went?
Right.
And
so we're going to be using the next couple episodes to do some one-on-one reflections on like episode 1 of Mars Hill, the Rise and Fall of Mars Hill, and then some reflections just on a one-to-one basis throughout that series coming up next. There's also a few documentaries. I think you've been watching some of them, but there's a new documentary out on HBO Max about a lady that was local here in Nashville named Gwen Shamblin, and her church called the Remnant. And she grew up in the Churches of Christ, which me and Daniel grew up in those traditions. And it was a mega church out in Brentwood, and it's called The Way Down, W-A-Y, The Way Down.
Not the church, the
documentary on HBO Max is called The Way Down. And so there's 3 episodes out now. Her and about 7 other major church leaders died in a plane crash, or supposedly died in a plane crash this summer and at the lake nearby here. They took off and then crashed into the lake. I'm not sure if they're really dead or not because of reasons, but y'all can watch it for yourself. Then there's another documentary I've been watching called The Vow, about a cult named Nexium. And the leader's name was Keith Raniere, who I think just got sentenced to 130 years in prison because of some stuff that happened again, because no one can pump the brakes on when you have power and when you have abundance.
Yep.
And so, those are a lot of the things kind of swirling around in my head. The Mars Hill podcast, Nexium, Gwen Shamblin, and just reflecting on like, man, these things all start with like a kernel of real truth.
Right.
Where it's like, so when Shamblin started her whole deal with this Way Down workshop, WEIGH, and is helping people lose weight, and people losing like 100 pounds, 150 pounds, big pounds. And so in the beginning, it's like, this is actually making a positive change in my life. This is good. But then it goes to manipulating people and doing other stuff. And when people question that, you say, I mean, it works.
Look at the
right?
results. Look at the fruit.
You lost 150 pounds, or Mark Driscoll's like, well, 1 million people downloaded my sermon last week on Apple, so it must be doing something right, and so there's always this kernel of truth, but what people do with it is use it to leverage and manipulate, and that's where it goes off the rails. So that's what I would love to talk about in the next season, and some of those reflections on all the content we're consuming, and trying to think about, okay, so what does that mean for our local churches? What does that mean for us as ministers and pastors and followers of Christ, and how we move forward?
It'll be good. We're excited for this next round of episodes. We're going to be starting with the Mars Hill 1-for-1 reflections. And so on those, as they come out, our recommendation, we'll say this in the episodes, but it would make a whole lot more sense if you listen to the Mars Hill episode and then listen to our reflections, because we're going to ask questions that we're not going to be able to give you the full context every time. We can give you some timestamps and some things if you want to do it like that. But generally, if you have listened to the Mars Hill podcast, the questions we will ask will make a lot more sense. So,
or if you listen to our episode first, you'll be like, oh my gosh, I got to go listen to this episode.
Or that. We need to call Christianity Today. Start pointing the people their direction. Anyway.
Yeah, you would definitely hear some stuff that we're gonna quote and be like, how
there's no way he actually said that.
What context was that in? And you're like, yeah, you should just listen to the episode.
Yeah. All right. Well, we're excited. We love you guys. We're thankful for whoever will listen to this either this week or in the future. And we're looking forward to another season.
Yeah. And I hope you guys, like, if you can, support us in any way that you can by just engaging with us. We have a Patreon account, if you want to throw $1 at us every time we put an episode out.
If you're on Apple or Spotify, if you like, download, follow the podcast, that helps visibility on it's not iTunes anymore, but Apple Podcasts. If you scroll all the way down, you can see the reviews. You can either leave a review if you really want to, or even just every time you get on, if you leave us 5 stars or 4 stars or however you feel we're doing, that helps just get some momentum going. So
yeah,
we appreciate any and all of it. We appreciate.
And so, I'm bad at doing that for other people, but I've been trying to. I'm like, if I'm going to ask other people to do this, I'm going to start hitting the like button. You want to watch a YouTube video or whatever. So yeah, please help us out. I know that's like the thing you hear on every YouTube video and every podcast, but we really do need it. We're starting out. We're getting things moving, and it would be really encouraging for me and Daniel to keep moving if we're seeing some response on that front. So love you guys. We appreciate you, and we really do hope that these episodes bring some Jubilee and freedom and shalom into the world.
Yes, sir. See y'all later.
Shalom.